Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a chapter that is absolutely essential, not just for your exams, but for anyone working with personal data. We're talking about risk management and the privacy impact assessment. We're going to break it all down, so let's get right into it.
We're going to start with this quote from the GDPR because honestly, it sets the stage perfectly. And let me be clear, this isn't just some friendly advice. It's a legal requirement. If a company's data processing activities could create a high risk for people, they have to do a privacy impact assessment, or a PIA, before they start. This is really the foundation of modern data protection, and you've got to understand it.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll kick things off with the legal side of things under the GDPR. Then, we're going to break down the 4 core elements of any risk assessment. After that, we'll explore the 2 main ways to measure risk. From there, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how companies decide what to do about these risks. And we'll wrap it all up with a close look at the different kinds of privacy threats out there. By the end, you'll have a really solid roadmap for this entire process.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, laying the foundation with the GDPR's rules for risk assessment. This isn't just theory, remember, it's the law.
Think of this slide as your ultimate cheat sheet for what a GDPR-compliant PIA needs. These are the 4 absolute must-haves. First, a systematic description of processing operations and their purpose. Yani, you have to clearly describe step by step what you're doing with the data and why you're doing it. Second, an assessment of necessity and proportionality. Is collecting this data really necessary, and is it proportional to the goal you want to achieve? Third, an assessment of the risks to data subjects. You need to evaluate what dangers the people whose data you hold might face. And finally, the measures envisaged to address the risks. So what are the safeguards and security measures you're going to put in place to protect that data? Seriously, these 4 points are a huge exam topic, so make sure you know them backwards and forwards.
Okay, now let's get to the real heart of risk assessment. These 4 elements are the fundamental building blocks you'll use to analyze pretty much any risk, so let's break them down.
This diagram here is a fantastic way to visualize how risk is calculated. Let's use an analogy. Imagine your asset is your house. The threat is a potential burglar. The vulnerability is an unlocked back door, and the controls are your security system, the locks, maybe a big dog. The combination of all these things determines the likelihood and impact of a break-in, which together give you your overall level of risk. This is a classic exam question, so make sure you really understand how these pieces fit together.
So let's break down that first element, the asset. The official definition is, an organization needs to put a value on individual assets and how that value may be reduced by a specific threat. Basically, an asset is anything that has value to the organization and needs to be protected. This could be something physical, like your servers or laptops, or it could be something you can't touch, like your company's data or its reputation. The key idea here is that you have to assign a value to it to really understand what's at stake. Next up, we've got the threat, which is defined as, in determining the threats facing an organization, there is past experience to go on and numerous publicly available reports that list current threats. So, a threat is any potential action or event that could cause harm to an asset. That mungkin yakun a cyber attack, a virus, a stolen laptop, or even just human error. Companies figure out these threats by looking at what's happened in the past and by keeping up with all the latest security reports. Now, for a threat to actually do damage, it usually needs to find a vulnerability. The formal definition is a flaw or weakness in a system's design, implementation, or operation and management that could be exploited to violate the system's privacy policy. In other words, a vulnerability, heya nochtet el daf, the weak spot that a threat can take advantage of. It could be a bug in your software, a weak password, or maybe forgetting to install a security update. Without that weak spot, a threat has a much tougher job.
And finally, how do we fight back against threats and vulnerabilities? We use controls. These are the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards employed within an organization to satisfy privacy requirements. L controls are, very simply, the protective measures we put in place to lower the risk. They can be administrative, like having a good security policy. They can be technical, like firewalls and antivirus software, or they can even be physical, like putting locks on server room doors.
So we have the building blocks of risk, right? But how do we actually measure it? Well, there are 2 main approaches here, quantitative and qualitative risk assessment. This is another classic exam topic, so let's really dig into the pros and cons of each one. This table really lays it all out. On one hand, you have quantitative assessment. This is all about the numbers, the dollars and cents. It's fantastic for figuring out which risks will cost you the most money and for justifying why you need to spend money on security.
The downside? It takes a lot of time and can sometimes give you this false sense of precision. On the other hand, we have qualitative assessment. This is more of a gut check approach. It's way faster and it's easier to get everyone to agree. But it's less precise, which can make it harder to decide which risks to fix first and even harder to get the budget approved for new security controls. Let's look at a really solid example of a qualitative method from FIPS 199. It breaks down impact into 3 levels. A low impact means there's a limited adverse effect. The company's a little bruised, but it can keep going. Moderate means a serious adverse effect, where key functions are significantly impacted. And high impact? Well, that's severe or catastrophic. The organization literally can't do one of its main jobs anymore. For your exam, lock in those keywords: limited for low, serious for moderate, and severe or catastrophic for high. All right, so you've found your risks. You've measured them. Now what? This is the decision point, where the rubber really meets the road. You have to decide which risks you can live with, and which ones absolutely have to be fixed. This table gives you a peek into how those decisions get made. First, organizations look at the impact criteria. This is the what could go wrong list, things like a data breach, damage to their reputation, or getting hit with legal fines. Then, they set their risk acceptance criteria. For example, a new startup that's trying to innovate quickly might be willing to accept more risk than a huge established bank. It's all about finding that unique balance between risk and reward for your specific organization. And this slide gives you a perfect roadmap for how to respond. If you find a high-risk issue, you need a strong corrective action plan in place ASAP, no delays. For a moderate risk, you still need to take action, but you can develop a plan within a reasonable amount of time. And for low risk, a manager can decide whether it's worth fixing or if the organization can just formally accept it. The key takeaway is having a clear, prioritized plan for every level of risk. Now, let's zoom in and shift our focus specifically to privacy. We've been talking about risk in general terms, but the whole point of a privacy impact assessment is to protect personal data. So let's get familiar with some key vocabulary. First up, let's define a privacy threat. It is a potential for violation of privacy, which exists when there is a circumstance, a capability, an action, or an event that could violate privacy and cause harm. Think of this as the privacy-specific version of the general threat we talked about earlier. In short, موقف أو حدث ممكن ينتهك خصوصية شخص ويسبب له ضرر. The key word to remember here is potential. And that leads us directly to a privacy breach, which is a situation in which PII is processed in violation of one or more relevant privacy safeguarding requirements. The difference here is absolutely critical. A privacy threat is a potential problem. A privacy breach is an actual problem that has happened. The انتهاك fairly hassle. The personal data was actually handled in a way that broke the rules. The threat is the possibility, the breach is the reality. Now this diagram might look familiar, and it should, but look closely. There's one crucial change. We've swapped out the general term asset for the very specific PII, personally identifiable information. That one simple change shifts the entire focus from protecting the company's stuff to protecting an individual's data. It's a subtle but really powerful distinction, and it's right at the heart of what privacy risk is all about. All right, let's start to wrap things up by looking at the specific types of privacy threats you need to be able to identify. This is definitely must-know stuff for your exams, so pay close attention here. Let's go through the first 3 threats on this table. First, we have appropriation, use of PII in ways that exceed an individual's expectation or authorization. A perfect example is when you give a store your email for a receipt, and then they start blasting you with marketing emails you never asked for. Second is distortion, use or dissemination of inaccurate or misleadingly incomplete personal information. Yani, this is when false or incomplete information about someone is spread around, which could really hurt their reputation. And third, induced disclosure, pressure to divulge personal information disproportionate to the purpose of the transaction. This happens when a website, say, makes you enter your birthday just to read a news article. They're pressuring you to give up more data than is really needed. Continuing down our list, we have insecurity. This one's straightforward. The improper protection and handling of PII, like having weak security that results in a data leak. Then there's surveillance, tracking or monitoring of personal information that is disproportionate to the purpose, like a company monitoring every single thing an employee types all day long. Unanticipated revelation is the non-contextual use of data that reveals an individual in unexpected ways. That بيصل لما يتم تحليل data sets كبيرة جدا, and you suddenly discover things about a person that they never intended to reveal. And finally, unwarranted restriction is blocking access to PII, which is when a company won't let you see or correct the data it holds on you.
And all of this brings us to the million-dollar question. Now that you can identify and assess risk, how do you decide which controls offer the most effective protection for the lowest cost? There's no single easy answer to that, but by using the frameworks and concepts we've talked about today, you'll be in a great position to start building a privacy program that is both strong and efficient. That's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in, and good luck with your studies.